It's been awesome for me to see so many like farms as a whole making transitions and efforts, and then individuals and watching people grow and realize like, okay, this not only helps me with farming, but it helps me in my life. And that's huge.
In today's episode of Voices from the Field, NCAT Specialist Audrey Kolde interviews Cynthia Flores, the founder of Labor Movement, an organization that believes when you move well, you work well. Audrey and Cynthia discuss the inspiration for creating Labor Movement and the importance of proper movement for those whose livelihoods depend on their bodies. Let's take a listen.
Hi, I'm Audrey Kolde, Agricultural Specialist for the National Center for Appropriate Technology, the National Sustainable Agriculture Information Service, ATTRA. Today, we're diving into a topic that's near and dear to many people, movement and wellness, especially for farmers whose livelihoods depend on using their bodies day in and day out. At the same time, research shows that 50 to 70% of farmers deal with chronic pain, and especially in their lower backs, joints, and muscles. Our guest today is the founder of Labor Movement, a program designed to support farmers, fishers, foresters, and other industrial athletes in maintaining long-term health while doing physically demanding work. Please welcome Cynthia Flores, a former farmer with 20 years of experience who now coaches others on functional movement patterning. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Audrey. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
All right, let's dive in with a bit of background. You spent an incredible 2 decades as a farmer. Can you share some of your experiences in that role?
Yeah, I farmed for 20 years in Western Maine, and I still currently live in Maine. I started out uh, milking cows. It was just supposed to be a short job for me, a couple of weeks to pass some time, and turned into 20 years vegetable farming, having my own business, and then also 12 of those 20 seasons off season, I worked at a local turkey farm during holiday harvest.
How has that inspired you to create the labor movement that you founded?
Labor movement came about, well, towards the end of my 20 years of farming, I decided I wanted to change things up. So I got involved in strength training while I was farming. And then as I moved out of my business, I returned to like some of my earlier college days of sports medicine and teaching people how to move. So I became a personal trainer as well as a strength athlete. And when COVID came around, the pivot in my life was to mash together the experience of farming with movement training, trying to help farmer friends at that point um, learn how to move and not get injured, since it was such a dire time of farmers need to feed people, and in general we just don't want to get injured, we don't want to have to go seek medical care. So that's how labor movement came about.
It was definitely a difficult time for a lot of farmers. And now, with the founding of the labor movement, what kind of programs does the labor movement offer? And how is it helping those farmers and fishing and forester professionals?
Sure. What we do is mostly in-person training at a farm's location on their schedule, because given 20 years of my own farming, I know how hard it is to get off the farm. It is an endeavor. So I go to the location and I'm working with farmers as a coach, teaching folks how to squat and hinge and push and pull. And some of these movements and patterns are already intact for a lot of people, because we learn how to move appropriately when we're a baby growing up. If you just think about the progression of, lifting your head and crawling and grabbing onto things and standing up. So we already know these things. For some of us, though, including myself, we alter our movement patterns because of a variety of things that happen in life. So we talk about those movement patterns, and then it's experiential education of let me demo how to squat. Let me talk about the things that you're looking at. People try it out. And then because it's small groups and my eyes can be on everyone, I can tell one person, or suggest to them, like, tip your toes out, or to another person, let's have you like elevate your heels and see if that feels better, and give them direction from any of these cues of like, where do you go from here?
Yeah, it's always helpful to get very much like real time feedback as you're doing it and feeling the difference. Um, as farmers, we are oftentimes in our bodies, which is one of the nice things about it as well. And as we move, and I could be wrong, but like as NCAT, we think a lot about sustainable farming, and as a whole, sustainable farming typically requires a lot of like very physical manual labor, because of the fact that there's less machinery than conventional farming, which can lead to a higher physical toll on the body. How do you think sustainable farmers can strike that balance in between, maintaining the principles of sustainability of small is beautiful and taking care of their bodies to prevent long-term injury or chronic pain so they can keep doing the work, of farming in sustainable ways?
Yeah, that's a great question. And all of the workshops that I do, we start out with the topic of health. And the big four things I'm trying to point out to folks is nutrition and getting enough calories on board, hydration, why that's important and what is enough hydration, sleep, and then stress management. So for any farmer, whether it's the small farm, sustainable farming, more physical labor, and even the monocrop and or tractor farmers, all of these things for us, honestly, whether we're just farming or not, and I hate to say the word just, whether we are farming or going about the human things that we do, keeping those four things as intact as possible is the best place to start for longevity and physical well-being. If you don't have enough calories on board, your muscles aren't going to be able to meet the demands of the physical labor. If you're not well hydrated, the two big systems that fluid resources get pulled from the cells, are your muscles and your skin. And the cramps and the fatigue adds up from there, and then you add in the sleep and you add in stress. So sure, I could talk about squat this way and hinge this way, and this might help you out, and I do want to cover those things with folks. But if I don't bring up the subject of the food, the fluid, the sleep, and the stress, then I'm potentially missing big parts, in my job as a coach for farmers.
Yeah. I'm just imagining also like the summertime, and you're raised in Texas, so the summertime, it is hard to eat, whenever you're out in it for hours at a time. And so thinking about what is your actual protein intake, you're starting at 5 a.m. or and working in the heat. And so and hydration at that moment is so critical. And so, yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of farmers, and me as well, get heat stressed for sure. It's so easy. It's so easy in the South.
Yeah, and it's definitely, I know there's a lot of farms up in the northern states that are just beginning to have this conversation of how do we maintain ourselves and take care of our crew in the heat, because it's hard.
Yeah.
And calorie consumption is hard. So trying to figure out ahead of time, like, how do I get this on board? How do I get the carbs on board? How do I get the protein on board? Because that's where you build muscle, you repair muscle, and it also helps you sleep. Protein helps you sleep. So it does a bunch of other things, but those are like the big three things. I'm like, okay, please understand this about protein. Um, yeah, it's not hard, and I think folks come to workshops or, find little snippets of information that are out there in the world from labor movement, and want the quick and easy fix. And there is no one quick and easy fix. And for me to say, do this one thing and your life will be great, I'm not going to say that, because maybe that'll help you today, but maybe not tomorrow.
The uniqueness of every single person's body is still very present. Like, just like an athlete in any field, the role of everyone's personal body and listening to it is still present.
Absolutely.
So, with your history of strength training and that segue of going from pure farm into this mindful movement in farming, what role are you looking at whenever you're teaching in between strength, just pure muscle in and out, versus proper movement? Is there do you see a lot of threshold in between just farmers that are just still need a little bit more muscle in their arms or in their legs to do it? Can you just kind of, elbow grease a lot? Or is it really the injuries are coming because just improper movement as a whole?
Another great question. It has a bunch of nuances depending on the person. So the three big things we're looking at is movement, performance, and skill. And if you look at that as a pyramid, with movement being your foundation, performance. So in athletic performance, if you're playing football, can you run down the field? Can you catch the ball? Skill of whatever the quote unquote sport is. So a lot of times in farming, I know for myself, I started out dairy farming and I got really good at milking cows, in a pit, 5-a-side, herringbone. I got really good at the skill of milking cows, but never did we being myself as an individual who had never farmed, and the farmer who hired me, there was no consideration to my base layer movement, which movement and my not having good movement patterns is why I eventually, after 3 or 4 months, quit milking cows, because my fingers were going to sleep whenever I was milking, because my shoulders were not quote unquote packed, so they weren't in the joint well, they weren't very well stabilized, and I was cutting, impinging nerves. So when you're asking the question of movement versus brute strength, one, mass moves mass. So yes, if you generate enough force, people who are bigger in general can move bigger loads, especially with determination. And farmers, if nothing else, are determined. And depending on how you look at it, that determination could also be stubbornness. Knowing how to move appropriately helps with strength, because you're using the mechanics of your body and the levers of your body. We could totally put somebody in a gym and just say, hey, next 4 weeks, just go lift weights, do whatever you want to do. And will that person get stronger? Yes, they'll totally get stronger, especially if they've never been or rarely been exposed to weights. Does that mean they're moving appropriately? No. Could that strength training set them up for injury because they're not moving appropriately? Absolutely. And it's the we don't know until we know part that is hard. So drilling things back and looking at those movement patterns is a great way to start. And like I said at the beginning, there's a lot of people who are already moving fine, but they're already moving well and they don't necessarily need modifications to the movements. It's the people who are maybe not moving so well that those are folks we can really help out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a question I think about oftentimes, as a female farmer, especially, where I'm like, can I figure out the technique of a broad fork in order to better be able to do this instead of just muscling through it? So it's good to hear that I can keep up if I have the proper movements and things like that as well.
And I want to say with the broad forks, it also depends on your body versus the tool. Like there are some broad forks that have like a really wide spread for the tines because you want to get more work done in theory with less energy. But if you've got a smaller, shorter wingspan and you're using a wider fork, you've got to account for that. Typically, females have less upper body strength than males. Learning how to use your entire body, not just with broad fork, with hoeing, with shoveling, any of the things you're doing, learning how to use your entire body instead of just your upper body is you're just gonna feel better at the end of the day. You're be more efficient, get more work done. And then, yeah, not be taxed and maybe have some extracurricular energy at the end of the day.
Yeah. Because again, it's me and my farming partner. I'm 5'10" and she's 5'4", and so just that difference in a broad fork, because I can use the height, my height as a tool in that versus her. And then whenever we're bending over, though, there is a further distance for me, and so it's just it's knowing when the tool is made for someone who is average man's height versus average woman's height, so that's a big piece of our story.
Yeah, and if it would be really easy to say, well, just go get a different broad fork, but you got to think about the financial aspects of what does it mean, depending on the size of your farm, to have two or three broad forks that can accommodate different people, several hoes and rakes and shovels of different sizes, handle lengths. So it's not totally understand it's not that easy. So in our in-person workshops, I try to give that information to farmers. Like, all right, here's the size of the hoe versus the handle length compared to your height and your body. Like, here's different ways to use this tool.
Yeah. I find farm hand tool ergonomics such an interesting level of this as well. Just, as we buy tools and things like that, and how that affects our body, even whenever you're talking about, the height of certain tillers or of hoes. And I believe you cover a little bit of that where, a lot of our tools are made for guys still. And so we're still figuring out our future when it comes to female centered tools, female centered, even just like clothing for farm work. We're like, we need a whole different organization just to make pants for us. But
there's definitely a lot of battles in the female world right now, and labor movement does have a little bit of a mission to create information about tool use for different body sizes, different body capacities, regardless of biological male or female, just people with different bodies.
what are the misconceptions as you're going through this line of work? Is there a lot of just like general misconceptions that farmers are coming up against whenever you go into their farms and you're teaching them about body movement and physical like knowledge we just don't have about physical health because we haven't been trained to be athletes?
I'm not going to say misconception, but I think what comes to mind rather quickly is the very old, I have to say, patriarchal and U.S. agriculture built on slavery of farming is hard work. Your body is probably going to hurt. You're probably going to get injured. And I know when I first started farming, when I talked about, my fingers were going numb and it was uncomfortable for me. I was the only female on the crew. I knew that farming was hard. I knew that complaining was just like, oh, why? I'm not going to complain. These people, we're all working really hard. There is so much work to do. I just need to suck it up. So I sucked it up for 3 or 4 months. And then finally myself decided these are not my cows. Like, my body does not need to feel this way. So I had the option in my life to not do the work. Like, I didn't, the income was great, the physical movement was great, but it wasn't worth the physical and the mental experience of how I felt milking. And I did not know that if I moved my body differently, that might not be happening. So I didn't have the education of, oh, or the thought of like, oh, if I move differently, this could be different. Like, I could still be milking cows right now, 20, however many years later. Probably not, honestly, but I could have lasted longer than 3 or 4 months. So misconceptions. I think it's more the mentality and the farm culture that this is just hard work. Don't complain. Just suck it up and get through it the best you can. And I think there is also, like, I know for myself, like farming, I'm like, yeah, I'm doing this thing and it's important. I'm feeding people in my community and I'm useful, which was very important to me and is important to me in my life, to be useful and giving. That I never thought of myself and my body unless it hurt. It was always like all the things I needed to do for the land, for the community, for my crew, for my partner at the time. So that's a long-winded response to misconception, but I think labor movement is like holding the door open to change thoughts of what farming is to the people who are doing the farming. That we can, you can have a good life. Your body doesn't need to hurt, and you can still be productive. And I think we're heading into a time where that's just going to get harder, and the stresses are racking up like crazy right now. And regardless of who you are on this planet, everybody needs to eat every day, and that is our job as farmers, is to feed people. And reckoning with that right now is huge.
Yes. Oh my goodness, yes. How are you doing that work to change the culture of healthy movement on the farms? I know it's like a group effort, but really making that mindset switch into collaboration among workers, that it's okay to voice what your body needs, kind of overcome that stubbornness we have as farmers as well. Have you seen anything that works, or, how is that cultural shift on these farms working?
I'm seeing it. So I started labor movement in 2020, and for the first couple of years, ventured into different states in the Northeast. In 2024, I went to 18 states and British Columbia. I worked with 900 farmers in person, plus everyone else I contacted, either online or email. So not intentionally, the mission of labor movement has become a movement. Like, farmers do want this information. Everybody? No, absolutely not. But how this is changing and how different farm crews are changing. Like, I'm not going to go to any farm and like beat anybody down if they don't want to change or they don't understand. I recognize that as a coach, part of my job is to build awareness, because there is a lot of lack of education of how people move. Like, it is nuanced. So building awareness, and then that individual needs to, at some point, well, they don't have to, but if they do, acknowledge that maybe something in their world could change. My job as a coach is to make offerings of like, here's some suggestions based on my 20 years of farming and 10 years as a strength athlete and 10 years as a personal trainer and 3 years as a massage therapist. Like, here's my accumulation of knowledge. Let me make some suggestions and like pull a thread somewhere and see where that goes. My job is to give that information and to then be patient. Like, I'll give you as much as I think you want right now, and then when you want more, come back. I have more. So within a workplace, I see several farms where like one person or three or four people are really into it, and they start a conversation, and I go to the farm and I do the workshop, and then I get messages of, oh, you would have been so, you would have been so proud of that move, that lift I made. But I also get like, oh, I'm glad you weren't here the other day when I moved this because it was awful. Make great. You're thinking about it. That's awesome. That's where we start.
Just that mindfulness is starts the culture. Like, even if it doesn't change how they move right now, they know it's out there. They know that there's a different way to function on their farm.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
You acknowledge the awareness, acknowledgement. It leads to develop a plan and implement a plan. You implement a plan. If it works, great. If it doesn't, you go back to develop. So yeah, it's great. It's been awesome for me to see so many like farms as a whole making transitions and efforts, and then individuals, and watching people grow and realize like, okay, this not only helps me with farming, but it helps me in my life. And that's huge.
that's awesome to have so many successes and so many lives changed as well. Do you, as you're educating these individuals and farms as a whole, like, is what are some of the like biggest resistances and challenges you're coming up against whenever you're talking about like the importance of body care for farmers and foresters and fisher people?
I think the biggest resistance is, it's both perception and reality, is that it takes time to make a change. Like, I've already learned how to do this quickly this way, but even though my body hurts, I'm resistant to change because then I'm going to move slower. And that comes with, well, if you practice this new way that feels awkward right now but will feel better, in a couple of days or a couple of weeks, in the long run, it won't take that much time. So I think the biggest hurdle is the mental perception of, this takes too much time, because in order to change something, either add something in, take something out, something else somewhere has to change. And depending on how many people bump into that change, there's resistance. So it's not just like, we'll talk about an individual. If an individual wants to make a change, great. They have to set their mind and as best they can consistently make that happen until it becomes a pattern. Let's go to like food. So personal experience for me, when I was changing how I ate and my nutrition on the farm, my then partner, and it was just the two of us, we bumped into each other a little hard, bump in quotes. Like, it was hard because I was changing the way that we as a unit ate and took care of, quote unquote, ourselves. Take it to a farm crew, like you're trying to change a workstation and a work process. Well, how many people are in the farm crew, and how many people now need to make an adjustment? Some people are going to be like, cool, yeah, I see that, let's do it. And other people are going to say like, I don't see it, I'm just going to keep doing it my way. So yeah, there's all different potential people involved in change, and change is growth. But I think a lot of people sometimes see change merely as uncomfortable, and we don't do uncomfortable well. So maybe mindset, look, if you can think of change as growth, maybe that's an easier pathway.
You're getting very much almost into like psychology of farming. You're like, yes, I'm moving your body, but also it's such a whole body process as well, like your health, your movement, and then even your mindset, is all needing to have a little more fluidity um, as well. And I think of those like split farm levels. You have crews of people that have done it this way for 20, 30 years, and then you have these new and beginning farmers. Do you think that younger generation of farmers is approaching the industry's physical demand like differently than the previous generations? Like how is that shift working out in real time for these farms with old and new regimes? All generations have old and new regimes.
Yes, I'm seeing a lot of younger farmers beginning, and by younger farmers, I mean right now the average age of farmers in general is 57, I think, point one in the 2022 ag census. And the average age of a beginning farmer who has farmed for 10 years or less is 47, point something. So younger farmers is, out there because, there's kids, teenagers, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds that are now running their own farm. So I think, especially with technology and social media and sharing, like, this is how we do this process, this is how we do this. I think there's a lot of individuals asking questions and saying, like, is there a way to make this more efficient, not just financially but physically more efficient, because we do see our elders who have farmed and see, for some of them, that their bodies are just beat up, and or they never get off the farm. And could things be different? So yeah, there's a sizable shift, I'll say, in how people are farming and what they want that business to look like. And or some people, there's a difference between, like, this farm is my business, I'm going to run this business, versus this is my life and I will do whatever needs to happen to make this a go. So people are coming at this from different angles, and I think that is something worth recognizing, that the pathway might be different for all these folks. And I don't want to leave out, like, there are individuals who are farm crew members, and this is their careers. Like, there are more people who are farm crew members, that are making farming their career, and part of that is land access. So all sorts of people in farming that we're talking about here. But I think everyone wants to have a good life and do the best they can.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the level of like respect that we have for these farmers that have been doing this for so long. Um, there's this amazing cooperative in Mississippi that has like multiple folks over 100 that are still actively farming small scale. It is just like, I just want to listen to their stories of staying that active. One person just celebrated like their 107th birthday, I want to say, and they still have like a quarter-acre garden that they're managing and stuff. And it's just, there's also the folks that are doing it so smart and so right, and so like recognition that like our elders, there's so much knowledge to glean as well, but the culture hasn't always been that. And so yeah, it definitely feels like we're learning the right lessons, hopefully, from seeing the next generation come in.
Yeah, I hope somebody's recording some of those stories from the elders. That'd be
Hmm.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, looking ahead at labor movement, what are your next few years looking like? Like, what are the exciting projects and initiatives that are on the horizon that you're getting started and getting going with?
I am excited about, the biggest thing is a 9-month cohort training that I and my original, like, strength coach, is helping me with develop a 9-month cohort, the farm movement advocate training, where we're gonna train one or two folks per farm at a farm level to help them develop an injury prevention and movement wellness plan. Because I find that for farms I have worked with, they're receptive to that wellness practice, but to have somebody like embedded within the farm to help, to help answer questions like, oh, my back's been hurting or my hands are hurting, like what can I do, instead of feeling like maybe they don't have a resource. So that's starting up on April 5th. I said something earlier about, when we're talking about tools and different body sizes. I hope to delve a little bit more into a project with a seed company here in Maine that also sells tools to do some videos of movement. So not just this is how you use the tool, but like these are the body things to think about. So that yeah, I'm excited about that project, and just figuring out ways to do more workshops in more areas. There's potential for finding other avenues for funding to assist farmers is also on the horizon, and that's all I can say about that right now.
Oh, that's really exciting. I'm excited for those videos, and I do really love the idea of having like a lead on the farm. Like I think that system has worked really well historically with food safety, where you have everyone, of course, learns the food safety, but having someone who is, the point person for this documentation and is making sure they're informed, I really do. I think I really like that model that you have someone on the farm who is, helping change that culture, of let's take a stretch break or, let's hydration breaks, which is something that we all need. But, just the mindfulness of it. It's someone's job.
Yeah. I'm excited about it. I think it'll grow over the next few years, is my hope.
And before we wrap up, do you have any final advice you'd like to share with listeners that are in these physically demanding roles?
Yeah. One, I, labor movement, would love to tell you that I appreciate all you do for your communities and for the land and critters and all of that stuff. And also want to say that even like one small change can have great impact on you. You may not notice it today, but over the weeks and months you might. So I think all or nothing isn't necessarily the route to better overall wellness or movement health in farming or in life. So just like grasp onto the one thing that interests you, of like, oh, maybe I could do this for myself. So start small, and it'll gain from there. And then anybody listening at any time, if you ever have questions, you can seek labor movement out as a resource, and I will gladly help you where I can, or point you in a direction that I think might be useful to you, regardless of your location.
And we'll link the website in the show notes, but be sure to check out Labor Movement with their website. They have some amazing resources that's continuing to grow. I just got your manual as well. And so there's a lot of tools on there and it's ever growing. So if you are in the farming, fishing, and forester world, don't forget to take care of your body because we want you to keep doing the work, and we appreciate you. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at attra.ncat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. ATTRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATTRA Sustainable Agriculture Program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week. And until then, keep on farming.